tried to solo on a chord progression, you figure out what scale is supposed to work over the chord progression, and you think, yay, I can play whatever I want and whatever notes I want from this scale. But then you start soloing and you go, what the heck? I'm playing some notes that still sound weird. What is going on with this? I can't figure out what's going on. In this video, I'm gonna answer that question and I'm gonna show you how to fix it so you can solo confidently on literally any chord progression that you ever learn in any song. So without further ado, let's get started. So the solution to this problem of playing properly in the key but still hitting these weird sounding notes is something that I call the target note method. And a lot of other people also call it the target note method. Basically, the gist of it is that in any chord progression, you need to know the notes to the arpeggios that are in each of the chords in the progression and target those notes every single time you switch to those chords. The reason for this is that we know for a fact, out of all the notes that are in the key that we're playing in, that the notes that are contained within the chord you're playing on are going to sound good because, well, they're part of the chord that you're playing on. They can't possibly sound bad if they're part of the chord you're playing on. So we need to really master this on every progression that we learn. The chord progression we're gonna use for this video is A minor to E minor to F to C. And this chord progression is actually in the key of C major. It's a 6, 3, 4, 1 progression. And theoretically, we should be able to just play the C major scale over the whole entire thing and it should sound good, right? Because, well, it's in the key of C, so C major should work. But we're gonna still run into this problem that I talked about. So what we're gonna do first is learn the arpeggios that are in this progression. The best way to do that is simply by knowing the names of the notes in each of the chords, by studying a little bit about how to construct chords in the major scale. If you don't know how to construct chords in the major scale, then make sure you check out this video right here. So the A minor chord has A, C, and E in it. E minor has E, G, B. F major has F, A, C, and C major has C, E, and G. So now we're gonna play through each of those arpeggios on the guitar. Check this example out. So you might be thinking that sounds pretty boring, and it does. It's just the arpeggios in the chords. But now what we're gonna do is we're gonna find all of the strongest melody lines that voice lead between each of those chords. What is voice leading? Voice leading is simply how each of the notes in one chord moves to the notes in the next chord. And there's always what we call a perfect voice leading line from one note to the next note in a chord. Sometimes there's gonna be notes that are shared between two chords. And if there is a note that is shared, what we call a common tone, we wanna keep that note the same, and any notes that change, we wanna move them as little as possible to the closest note that we can find in the next chord. So from A minor to E minor, there's an E in both of those chords, so we can keep that E exactly where it is. There is no C in the E minor chord, but there is a B, which is only 1 fret below C. So we're gonna move C down 1 fret. And then there's no A in the E minor chord either, but there is a G. So the G is 2 frets below A, so we're gonna move the A 2 frets lower. And that gives us our perfect voice leading from the A minor to the E minor chord. Now you might be wondering, what's the point of all this voice leading stuff? Well, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty lazy, and notes are also lazy too. Notes don't really want to do a lot of work. They don't want to run an entire marathon to move to the next chord. They want to move nice and short distances. So we're going to give those notes what they want. They want to move really close by half steps and whole steps, or if they don't need to, they don't want to move at all. So this results in us creating really, really strong melodies that actually outline the chord changes in our solos. And even if you're not playing fast, which a lot of the stuff we're gonna do here is not playing fast at all or playing show-offy. It's gonna create the strongest melodies that you can and play with soul. People like to say, I don't wanna play fast, I wanna play with feel. Well, guess what? This is how you play with feel by using theory too. Wow, who knew you could do both? So now let's take a look at some examples of super simple melodic lines we can create using only the arpeggio notes in the chords and making sure we perfectly voice lead each note that we play. So as you can see, those lines were unbelievably simple. You pretty much can't get any simpler than that. But every single one of those notes was a chord tone in each of those chords, and it created a super strong melody that is super duper simple, yet effective. Okay, yeah, I understand. Adam, this is still too boring, man. You're losing me. Okay, I'll give you what you want. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start to finally incorporate some a little bit fancier techniques. We're gonna now allow ourselves to use all of the notes from the major scale again. But now what we're going to do is make sure that we target one of those chord tones every single time the chord switches. So essentially we can play whatever we want in the C major scale, but we want to lead into a chord tone by step, sort of just like what we did with the simple voice leading lines. But now we want to give ourselves the freedom to play more stuff on each chord and then lead our lines into the next chord by half step or by whole step. As you can see now, we basically broke everything down to the simplest possible elements, just the notes that are in the chords. And now when we start adding back in all the complicated stuff, we're approaching all the exact same notes from a completely different perspective. Now all of those C major scale notes aren't just random notes we can pick whenever we want. No, we're dividing them up between the chord tones and the non-chord tones, and we're placing more emphasis on the chord tones, and that makes it so we can actually hear the chord changes in our solo. Even if you strip away the backing track, you would still be able to hear all of that same voice leading from step number 2, but it's kind of dressed up and flourished up a little bit with all these other notes. And the last step is, well, we're just gonna forget about all the stuff that I just talked about except for one thing and just play. So at the end of the day, you don't have to perfectly voice lead every single line you play in every single chord. You don't have to do anything. You can just do whatever you want, man. But we wanna sound as good as we possibly can, so that's why we're studying this stuff. So what we're gonna do is, the only rule is we have to land on one of those chord tones on the downbeat when the chord switches. It doesn't have to be approached by step. We can do a gigantic leap into it, make those notes do a lot of running, right? But it's still gonna sound like we're making and outlining the chord changes because we're still landing on one of those chord tones on the ends of our phrases and when the chord changes. So as you can see, some of those lines were pretty skippy and kind of complicated, but if you notice, every single time, right on the downbeat, if you analyze, all of those notes were one of the chord tones. And that's what this is all about, guys. It's about having that control of knowing how each note in the key is gonna sound over each of those chords. So we know that every single time we land on one of those chord tones, it's gonna sound really nice and resolved. And this is something you should strive to be able to do in your solos. Be able to end your phrases on chord tones. Maybe not every single time the chord changes, but if you can end your phrases on a chord tone, you know you won't land on one of those weird sounding notes. The weird sounding notes are actually not really the problem. The problem is landing on it and not knowing how it's supposed to sound. And you know, guys, at the end of the day, we're not here trying to be technicians. We're trying to just play music and have this stuff happen naturally. But if you practice it enough in the practice room, these things start to come out and you're playing without you having to think about it. When I'm playing, I'm not thinking about, oh, I need to do this scientific formula and make sure I land exactly on one of the chord tones every time. No, actually, I've noticed as I've done this over the years, eventually it'll actually start to sound a little boring if you always land on a chord tone every single time you play a solo. But you gotta be able to do it so you can have that control. You always gotta learn the rules and then break the rules. Don't just break the rules without freaking knowing the rules. And one of my favorite techniques to combine with this target note method is simply using really cool melodic patterns in my solos and playing that way. So if you're interested in a completely free ebook resource for some patterns you can use in your solos, then go to jamsville.com and download 10 essential improvisation patterns for free. If you feel like you learned something from this video and had fun with me today, then make sure you subscribe to the channel, and until next time, listen, learn, and jam.